He kidnapped me because he thought I was the daughter of his enemy. He thought I was worth millions in leverage. But when the most dangerous man in Seoul realizes he actually kidnapped a broke convenience store clerk with zero value, what happens to me then? I expected a bullet. What I got was a proposal. 10 minutes ago, I was heating up a corn dog for a customer. Now, I'm locked in the back of a Maybach with a man who looks like he owns the city and wants to burn it down. He thinks I'm a princess. I have about 5 minutes to tell him I can barely afford instant noodles before he finds out the truth. My name is Nari, and this is the night I accidentally stole the Mafia Boss's heart. Before we drive into the darkness, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss how this misunderstanding ends. The fluorescent lights of the CU convenience store hummed with a headache-inducing buzz, the only sound accompanying the relentless drumming of rain against the glass. It was 2:14 a.m. Nari leaned her elbows on the counter, staring at a pyramid of instant noodle cups she had just reorganized for the third time. Her bank notification had pinged 10 minutes ago. Rent deduction failed. Insufficient funds. She sighed, blowing a stray strand of hair out of her eyes. Great. Eviction by Friday. The electronic chime of the door startled her. A man stumbled in, dripping wet, clutching his side. He wore a suit that cost more than Nari's entire life earnings, but it was ruined by mud and what looked suspiciously like blood. He didn't look at her. He rushed to the back, grabbed a bottle of water, and slammed a crisp 50,000 won bill on the counter. "Keep the change," he rasped, his eyes darting to the rain-slicked street outside. "Sir, I can't accept," Nari started, but he was already turning to leave. As he turned, his hand brushed a display of chewing gum, knocking a pack over. He didn't stop. He pushed back out into the storm and vanished around the corner. Nari frowned. She reached for the fallen pack of gum to put it back, but her fingers grazed something cold and metallic underneath it. A small, silver USB drive. It was heavy, engraved with a serpent crest. "Hey, you dropped this!" Without thinking, Nari grabbed the drive and ran out the automatic doors. The cold rain hit her instantly, soaking through her green uniform vest. She squinted into the darkness. "Mister!" The street was empty. The man was gone. She looked down at the drive in her hand. Why would someone leave this? Suddenly, the roar of an engine cut through the sound of the rain. Blinding white headlights flooded the alley, freezing Nari in place. A sleek black van screeched to a halt right in front of the store, splashing dirty water onto her sneakers. The side door slid open before the wheels even stopped rolling. Two men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't look like customers. They looked like executioners. "Green vest, height matches," one of them said into a wrist piece. "Target acquired." "Wait!" Nari took a step back, clutching the USB drive tight in her fist. "I think you have the wrong—" She didn't finish the sentence. A rough hand clamped over her mouth and the world tilted sideways as she was shoved violently into the dark interior of the van. The door slammed shut, sealing out the rain, the store, and the only life she knew. The transfer had been a blur of rough hands, freezing rain, and a blindfold that smelled of gasoline. When the hood was finally ripped off, Nari gasped, her lungs burning as she scrambled backward until her spine hit smooth, warm leather. She wasn't in the van anymore. She was in a space that felt less like a vehicle and more like a mobile boardroom. The air was dead silent, insulated from the storm raging outside, and smelled of sandalwood and cold, metallic danger. "Stop moving," a voice commanded. It wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a gavel sentence. Nari froze. Sitting across from her in the dim cabin was a man who looked like he had been carved out of ice. He was reading a file on a tablet, illuminated by the soft blue glow of the screen. He wore a suit that probably cost more than the entire convenience store she worked in, and his stillness was more terrifying than the men who had grabbed her. "Director Suk has finally decided to pay his debts," the man said, still not looking up. "Though I expected his daughter to have better manners." Nari's heart hammered against her ribs. She was shivering violently, dripping rainwater onto the pristine floor mats. She clutched her hands into fists, feeling the hard edge of the silver USB drive she had managed to shove into her pocket during the struggle. "I don't know who Director Suk is," Nari managed to whisper, her voice trembling. "And I'm not his daughter." The man paused. His finger stopped scrolling on the tablet. Slowly, agonizingly, he lifted his eyes. When his gaze landed on her, the temperature in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her chest. Specifically, at the bright green nylon vest she was wearing over her hoodie. The vest with the convenience store logo stitched poorly over the pocket. He stared at the name tag. Nari, night shift clerk. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The man closed his tablet with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. He leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing into slits of pure, lethal fury. "Where is the girl?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I told you," Nari snapped, fear giving way to the absurdity of the situation. "I was heating a corn dog. Your goons grabbed me from the sidewalk." The man pressed a button on the armrest. The partition separating them from the driver slid down with a hum. "Pull over," he ordered. "Sir?" the driver asked, confused. "I said pull over," the man hissed, staring at Nari as if she were a stain on his upholstery. "You idiots didn't grab the heiress. You grabbed a clerk." The Maybach lurched to a halt on the shoulder of the deserted highway, the rain drumming a frantic rhythm against the roof. The partition slid all the way down. The driver, a broad-shouldered man named Dae-sung, turned around, his face draining of color as he took in the scene. His boss's icy rage, and the shivering, soaking wet girl in a green vest. "Explain," Kyo-moon said. The word was soft, but it carried the threat of a guillotine. "Sir, the tracker. The signal was pinpointed to the convenience store," Dae-sung stammered, his eyes darting to Nari. "Target was wearing green. Intelligence said she'd be in disguise. We saw the vest, we moved." "Disguise," Kyo-moon repeated, looking at Nari with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. He reached out and flicked the cheap plastic name tag on her chest. "Does convenience store night shift look like a high-level disguise to you? Or does it look like you kidnapped a minimum wage worker while the real target was likely using the bathroom inside?" Nari pressed herself tighter against the door, her breath hitching. She understood enough to know that being a mistake was infinitely more dangerous than being a hostage. Hostages had value. Mistakes were erased. "I didn't see anything," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "I swear, just let me out here. I'll walk back. I won't tell anyone." Kyo-moon turned his gaze back to her. It was clinical, devoid of empathy. He was calculating the variables. If he let her go, she could describe his face, the car, the route. If he killed her, it was messy, undignified, and a waste of a bullet on a rainy Tuesday. "You've seen my face," he stated flatly. "I have face blindness," Nari lied, desperate. "And bad night vision. I honestly thought you were an Uber driver until 5 minutes ago." For a split second, a flicker of something, annoyance, amusement, twitched near Kyo-moon's mouth. But it vanished instantly. He pulled a heavy, suppressed pistol from his jacket holster. Nari stopped breathing. "Boss," Daesung warned quietly. "We're exposed here." Kyo-moon weighed the gun in his hand, looking at Nari. She wasn't begging or crying anymore. She was staring at the gun with a strange, defiant resignation, her hand clenched tight inside her pocket. "We can't let her go," Kyo-moon decided, reholstering the weapon with a smooth, practiced motion. "And I'm not leaving a corpse on the roadside tonight. The police are already swarming the sector." He hit the button to lock the doors. The mechanical thud echoed like a prison cell closing. "Drive," he commanded. "Take her to the penthouse. We'll figure out how to dispose of the problem in the morning." As a car roared back onto the highway, Nari let out a shaky breath, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the USB drive in her pocket. She was alive, but she had just been upgraded from a mistake to a prisoner. The private elevator ascended with a speed that made Nari's ears pop. There were no buttons inside, only a biometric scanner that Kyo-moon had pressed his palm against without a word. When the doors slid open, Nari hesitated. She looked down at her muddy, cheap sneakers, then at the expanse of pristine white marble stretching out before her. "Move," Kyo-moon ordered, nudging her shoulder. Nari stumbled into the room. It wasn't an apartment. It was a fortress of glass and steel suspended above the glowing veins of Seoul. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city she usually only saw from the gutter level. The furniture was sparse, sharp-edged, and black, just like the man throwing his wetsuit jacket onto a designer leather couch. "Stay there," Kyo-moon commanded, walking toward a sleek wet bar to pour himself a drink. "Do not touch anything. Do not go near the windows." Nari hugged her arms around herself, shivering in her damp uniform. But as her eyes darted around the room, fear began to wrestle with a very different emotion. Awe. Her gaze landed on the kitchen. It was an open-concept masterpiece, with a refrigerator that was wider than the entire wall of her Goshiwon room. She took an unconscious step toward it. "Is that a glass door Sub-Zero?" Kyo-moon paused, the crystal tumbler halfway to his lips. He turned slowly, staring at her as if she had started speaking in tongues. "I just kidnapped you. I threatened to shoot you on the highway, and you are asking about my refrigerator." "I've only seen those in magazines," Nari muttered, her stomach giving a treacherous growl. "It costs more than my life insurance." "It probably does," Kyo-moon said icily. He took a sip of amber liquid, his eyes tracking her every move. "This is a temporary holding cell, not a hotel. You are here because you are a loose end I haven't decided how to cut yet. Don't get comfortable." He walked over to a wall panel and punched in a code. The elevator doors locked with a heavy, magnetic thud. The blinds on the windows descended automatically, shutting out the city lights and turning the penthouse into a gilded cage. "There is a guest room down the hall. Go inside and stay there," he said, loosening his tie with a weary expression. "If I hear you, or see you, or if you break anything, the option of the bullet is still on the table." Nari watched him disappear into the shadows of the master wing. As soon as he was gone, she slumped against the marble island, her legs finally giving out. She reached into her pocket, her fingers trembling as she traced the serpent crest on the stolen USB drive. She was trapped in a castle with a dragon, but for the first time in her life, she was warm. The morning sun sliced through the blinds, casting sharp, cage-like shadows across the marble floor. Nari hadn't slept. She sat on the edge of the guest bed, the silver USB drive warm and heavy in her palm. The door clicked open. Kyo-moon stood there dressed in a fresh, charcoal grey suit. He looked immaculate, rested and utterly lethal. He held a suppressed pistol loosely at his side, as casual as a car key. "Get up," he said softly. "The rain has stopped. It's time to clean up." Nari stood, her legs trembling, but she didn't move toward the door. She moved toward the window, putting the heavy glass desk between them. "You're going to kill me," she stated. It wasn't a question. "You are a civilian who has seen the face of a syndicate leader and the interior of his safe house," Kyo-moon replied, stepping into the room. His voice was devoid of malice. It was just business. "I can't let you walk out the front door. It's nothing personal." "I have something of yours," Nari said, holding up her hand. The silver serpent crest on the USB drive caught the light. Kyo-moon froze. His eyes narrowed on the small device. "You took that from the store?" "The man who ran in. He dropped it. I grabbed it before your goons grabbed me." Kyo-moon extended his free hand. "Give it to me, and I will make it quick." "No." Nari tightened her grip. "I plugged it into the smart TV in this room last night while you were sleeping. It asked for a decryption key." Kyo-moon let out a dry, humorless laugh. "And you think holding a locked drive saves you? My tech team will crack that in an hour. Hand it over, Nari." "They won't," Nari said, her voice shaking but her chin high. "Because it's a tiered biometric lock with an alphanumeric backup. The man who dropped it? He was being chased. He hid it under the gum display intentionally to keep it from his pursuers, hoping to retrieve it later, I think. I stared at that ticket for 4 hours, waiting for my shift to end. I memorized the 12 digits because I thought it was the winning numbers, not a code." Kyo-moon paused. The gun lowered an inch. He studied her face, looking for the lie. He saw only desperate, terrified truth. "I threw the ticket in the trash before you came," Nari lied. A gamble on her life. "If you kill me, that drive stays locked forever. And judging by how much you want it, I'm guessing you can't afford that." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Kyo-moon slowly holstered his gun. He walked up to the desk, leaning over until his face was inches from hers. She could smell his expensive cologne and the scent of gunpowder. "Congratulations," he whispered, his dark eyes glittering with a dangerous mix of fury and respect. "You just promoted yourself from a loose end to a liability. You stay, but if you forget a single digit of that code, you'll wish I had shot you this morning." 3 days of captivity felt like 3 years. The silence of the penthouse was heavier than the iron bars of a prison cell. For Nari, who was used to the chaotic symphony of dinging door chimes, drunk customers, and the constant hum of refrigerator compressors, the stillness was driving her insane. She couldn't leave. She couldn't call anyone. And she absolutely could not sit still. Kyo Moon found her in the kitchen at 8 p.m. when he returned from a meeting with his capos. He walked in expecting the silence he cherished. Instead, he heard the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of plastic containers being stacked. He froze in the entryway. His immaculate, chef-grade kitchen, a space he treated with religious reverence, had been violated. "What?" Kyo Moon said, his voice dangerously calm. "Are you doing?" Nari jumped, nearly dropping a jar of artisan saffron. She spun around, wiping her hands on her grey hoodie. "Oh, you're back. I got bored." Kyo Moon walked slowly to the kitchen island. His eyes twitched as he surveyed the damage. The spices, which had been arranged alphabetically by region of origin, were now colour-coded. His rare, imported, loose-leaf teas had been shoved to the back of the pantry to make room for a tower of instant ramen cups she had seemingly materialised out of thin air. "You reorganized my pantry," he stated, looking at her like she had just finger-painted on a Monet. "It didn't make sense," Nari explained defensively, crossing her arms over her green vest. "You had the salt on the top shelf. Do you know how inefficient that is? Salt is a high-velocity item. It needs to be at waist level for rapid deployment." "Rapid deployment," Kyo Moon repeated, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It is Himalayan pink salt, Nari, not a tactical weapon." "And the fridge," she continued, ignoring him. "You have 6 bottles of sparkling water and 1 lemon. That's a terrible inventory ratio. I made a list of things you need to buy, starting with real food." She slid a piece of scrap paper across the marble counter. Kyo Moon stared at it. It was a list of convenience store junk food written in bubbly handwriting. "I am holding you hostage," Kyo Moon said, his voice low and tight. "I am a man who commands armies. I have people killed for looking at me wrong. And you are lecturing me on my inventory ratios? Well, if I'm going to be stuck here until you figure out how to handle your enemies, I'm not going to starve," Nari shot back, though her hands were shaking slightly behind her back. "And I'm not going to die of boredom. I fixed your dishwasher, by the way. The drain hose was kinked." Kyo Moon looked at the dishwasher, then back at the small, infuriating woman in the cheap green vest, who was currently dismantling his life, one appliance at a time. He felt a headache forming behind his eyes, a specific, Nari-shaped headache. "Put the salt back," he ordered, walking toward his bedroom to escape her. "And if you touch my espresso machine, I will reconsider the bullet." "Burn it," Kyo Moon said, tossing a heavy black garment bag onto the leather sofa. Nari looked up from her bowl of unauthorized cereal. "Burn what?" "That vest," he pointed a manicured finger at her chest. "And the hoodie. And those shoes that look like they've survived a war zone. If you are going to play the part of a multimillionaire's daughter, you cannot look like you scan barcodes for a living." "I paid 20,000 won for these sneakers," Nari argued, shielding her shoes defensively. "And this vest is company property. If I don't return it, they dock my pay." "Nari." Kyo Moon stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "You are currently dead to the world. Your pay has been docked permanently. Now get dressed. We have to send a proof-of-life photo to Director Suk in 20 minutes. And if you look like a pauper, he'll know it's a setup." He unzipped the bag, revealing a cascade of midnight blue silk. It was a gown that cost more than Nari's entire education. Beside it, he placed a pair of silver heels and a diamond choker that glittered coldly under the recessed lighting. Nari swallowed hard. She took the items and retreated to the bathroom. 10 minutes later, the door creaked open. Nari stepped out, her hands clasping her elbows nervously. The dress was a second skin of liquid silk, draping over curves that the baggy uniform had completely hidden. The dark blue fabric made her skin look like porcelain. She had brushed her hair back, revealing a delicate neck and wide, uncertain eyes. She wobbled slightly in the heels. "I feel like I'm wearing a car payment," she muttered, tugging at the hem. "It's too tight." Kyo-moon didn't answer. He was standing by the window, checking his watch, but as he turned around, the movement stopped. His hand froze halfway to his tie. He stared. For 3 days, he had seen a nuisance, a problem, a liability in a green polyester vest. Now, stripped of the poverty that usually defined her silhouette, she was breathtaking. The silence stretched too long. Nari shifted, her cheeks flushing pink. "Is it that bad? I told you I'm not an heiress." Kyo-moon blinked, the mask of the cold syndicate boss sliding back into place, though his jaw remained tight. He walked over to her, his movements predatory and precise. He stopped inches away, reaching out. Nari flinched, but he only brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering near the pulse jumping in her throat. "It's not bad," he said, his voice dropping an octave, rougher than before. "It's passable. Now stop trembling. You're supposed to be arrogant, not terrified." He stepped back, turning away abruptly, as if looking at her for too long would burn his retinas. "Sit on the couch, and for God's sake, don't wrinkle the silk." The red recording light on the tripod blinked like a steady, unblinking eye. Kyo-moon stood behind the camera, checking the frame on a monitor. The living room had been staged to look like a generic high-end holding location. Dark curtains drawn, no identifying landmarks visible. "Chin up," Kyo-moon ordered. "You look like you're facing a firing squad. You're supposed to be Director Suk's daughter. You should look bored, annoyed, and slightly inconvenienced, not terrified." Nari sat on a velvet stool, smoothing the midnight blue silk of the gown over her knees. Her hands were sweating. "It's hard to look bored when I know that if I mess this up, a warlord is going to storm the building." "If you mess this up," Kyo-moon corrected, stepping around the tripod. "He won't storm the building. He'll bomb it. Now, look at the lens. Say the line." Nari swallowed. She looked at the black glass circle. "Daddy, I'm fine. Just pay him what he wants so I can go home. This service is terrible." Kyo-moon sighed, a sharp exhale of frustration. "Cut. You sound like a telemarketer reading a script. Where is the arrogance, the entitlement?" He walked over to her. Nari leaned back instinctively, the scent of his cologne filling her senses again. He didn't stop until he was standing directly behind her stool. He reached down, his hands settling heavy and warm on her bare shoulders. The contact sent a jolt of electricity straight down her spine. "We do it together," Kyo-moon murmured, his voice low and vibrating against her ear. "I need to show him I have total control over you. Don't flinch." He signaled the camera with a remote in his hand. The red light blinked again. Kyo-moon's grip tightened slightly on her shoulder, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin of her collarbone. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, staring into the lens with a terrifying, predatory calm. "Tell him," Kyo-moon whispered, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. The intimacy was fake, a performance for the enemy, but the heat radiating from his body was dangerously real. Nari's breath hitched. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but the fear was suddenly mixed with something else, something hot and confusing. She looked into the camera, her eyes wide and darkened by the proximity of the man looming over her. "Daddy," her voice came out breathless, husky. "I'm safe. He's treating me well. Just hurry." Kyo-moon smirked at the camera, a cold, possessive expression that promised violence to anyone who tried to take her. He cut the feed. The red light died. But Kyo-moon didn't move away. For 3 heartbeats, he stayed there, his hand still claiming her shoulder, his breath still ghosting over her neck. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Then he pulled back abruptly, straightening his tie as if nothing had happened. "Better," he said roughly, turning his back to her. "That will buy us 24 hours. At 3:14 a.m., the penthouse was silent except for the bubbling of boiling water. Nari couldn't sleep. The adrenaline from the video call had faded, leaving a hollow hunger in its wake. She had stripped off the suffocating silk gown and raided the guest closet, drowning herself in a plain white t-shirt that hung to her knees. She stood over the stove, stirring a pot of the spicy ramyun she had forced Kyo-moon to buy. The red broth swirled, releasing a cloud of steam that smelled like salt, chili, and home. "Is the ventilation system broken?" Nari jumped, nearly dropping her chopsticks. Kyo-moon was leaning against the archway. He had ditched his jacket and tie, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar and sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his eyes stark against his pale skin. "It's called flavor," Nari whispered, turning back to the pot. "Something this kitchen usually lacks." "Why are you awake?" "Insomnia," Kyo-moon replied, walking closer. He stopped at the island, watching the steam rise. "And the smell of chemical preservatives is hard to ignore." "It's not chemicals, it's comfort." Nari poured the noodles into 2 bowls. She hesitated, then pushed one across the marble island toward him. "Eat. You look like you haven't had a real meal in 3 days." Kyo-moon stared at the bowl of bright red soup as if it were a biological weapon. "I don't eat processed carbohydrates after midnight." "Suit yourself." Nari took a loud, defiant slurp of noodles. "More for me." She ate with gusto, ignoring him. Kyo-moon watched her, his expression unreadable. Slowly, hesitantly, he picked up the spare set of chopsticks. He took a small, cautious bite. The spice hit him instantly. He coughed, reaching for the glass of water Nari had already poured for him. "Too hot for the big bad boss?" Nari teased, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Kyo-moon glared at her, his eyes watering slightly. "It is aggressive. Like you." But he took another bite, then another. For 10 minutes the war outside didn't exist. There were no assassins, no debts, no leverage. Just the soft clinking of chopsticks against ceramic and the quiet hum of the city below. They ate in companionable silence, standing on opposite sides of the island, the kingpin and the clerk, sharing a $3 meal in a $10 million apartment. "It's not terrible," Kyo-moon admitted finally, setting down his empty bowl. He looked at Nari, really looked at her, without the lens of calculation. "My mother used to make something like this." before she died. Nari froze, seeing a crack in the ice for the first time. Kyo-moon. Go to bed, Nari, he said softly, turning away before she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. Tomorrow, everything changes. Nari waited until the heavy oak door of the master suite clicked shut. Kyo-moon had a conference call scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. She had seen the reminder pop up on his tablet during breakfast. She had exactly 45 minutes. She didn't run to the front door. She knew it was bolted with deadbolts that required a key she didn't have. She went straight to the elevator. Kneeling on the marble floor, she pulled a thin, serrated steak knife from her pocket, stolen during the noodle incident the night before. She wedged the tip of the blade behind the brushed steel maintenance panel located just below the biometric scanner. "Come on," she hissed, wiggling the knife. "You're just a circuit. You're just a machine." She wasn't a hacker, but her father had been an electrician before the gambling debts ruined him. She spent her childhood holding flashlights and learning how to bridge connections to keep the lights on when the power company cut them off. With a sharp pop, the panel cover clattered to the floor. Nari stared at the nest of red and blue wires. She ignored the complex fiber optics of the scanner and looked for the manual override circuit, the fail-safe required by fire safety laws. "Red to ground," she muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. She used the knife to strip a fraction of casing off the emergency wire and pressed it against the steel frame. A spark hissed, smelling of ozone. The elevator panel beeped. The red light on the scanner flickered, died, and then turned a solid, inviting green. Ding! The heavy steel doors slid open smoothly. Nari let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for days. Yes! She scrambled to her feet, ready to dive into the car and pound the button for the lobby. But as she stood up, a shadow fell over her. She froze. Slowly, she turned around. Kyo-moon was leaning against the archway of the living room, arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't been on a call. He had been watching her. Nari's heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped the steak knife, taking a step back toward the open elevator. "I won't go back in the room." Kyo-moon didn't move to stop her. He didn't even reach for a weapon. He just stared at the exposed wiring and the butter knife in her hand with an expression she couldn't place. It wasn't anger. It was curiosity. "You bypassed a syndicate-grade biometric lock," he said, his voice flat. "With a piece of cutlery." "It's a fire safety override," Nari said, her voice shaking but defiant. "It's standard code for high-rises. You overcomplicated the lock but ignored the basic wiring." Kyo-moon pushed off the wall and walked toward her. Nari braced herself, but he walked past her and looked into the open elevator shaft. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a theory. "I have men with master's degrees in engineering who couldn't breach this door," he murmured. He turned his dark gaze back to her. "You have a talent for finding cracks in armor, Nari." He reached out and gently plucked the steak knife from her trembling hand. "The lobby is swarming with my guards," he said softly. "Even if you went down, you wouldn't make it to the street. But I am impressed." He pressed the button to close the doors, sealing her escape route. But this time, he didn't lock her in. "Get changed," he ordered, tossing the knife onto the side table. "We're going out. If you can break into my elevator, maybe you can help me break into something else." The venue wasn't a hotel ballroom or a convention center. It was the sub-basement of the National History Museum, a concrete bunker draped in black velvet and illuminated by chandeliers that cost more than Nari's entire neighborhood. The air smelled of expensive perfume, stale cigar smoke, and fear. "Remember," Kyo-moon murmured as the heavy iron doors creaked open. "You are not Nari the clerk. You are Suk Mirei, the spoiled princess of the Incheon syndicate. You are bored, you are untouchable, and you belong to me." He stepped closer, sliding his hand around her waist. The heat of his palm burned through the thin, midnight blue silk of her gown. It was a possessive, calculated grip, designed to signal ownership to every predator in the room, but it made Nari's breath hitch in her throat. "I feel like I'm going to throw up," she whispered, forcing a stiff smile. "Swallow it," Kyo-moon replied, his lips barely moving. "And don't look at the floor. Look at them like they owe you money." They descended the grand staircase. The room was a sea of sharks in tuxedos. Nari saw faces she recognized from the news: politicians, tech CEOs, famous actors, mingling with men who had scars running down their necks and guns bulging under their jackets. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Nari reached for one, her hand trembling, but Kyo-moon's fingers tightened on her waist, stopping her. "No alcohol," he warned. "You need your wits. That man over there, the one with the eye patch, he sells human organs. The woman in the red dress, she traffics weapons. If you slip up, if you break character for 1 second, they will tear you apart before I can unholster my weapon." Nari stiffened, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. This wasn't a party. It was a pit of vipers. She straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of customer service rage she had ever suppressed during a double shift. She lifted her chin, looking the organ dealer dead in the eye with a look of utter disdain. The dealer blinked and looked away first. "Good," Kyo-moon whispered, his voice vibrating against her ear. "Very good." They moved through the crowd, a unified front of dark elegance. Kyo-moon navigated the room with the ease of a predator in its natural habitat. But Nari noticed something else. His muscles were coiled tight. His eyes were constantly scanning the exits, the shadows, the waiter's hands. He wasn't enjoying this. He was hunting. "Why are we here?" Nari asked under her breath as they paused near a velvet rope. "Because Director Suk is paranoid," Kyo-moon replied, scanning the mezzanine level. "He won't believe the video. He needs to see you in public, on my arm, alive and compliant. We are bait, Nari. We are waiting for someone to bite." As if on cue, the lights dimmed. The auction was beginning. But Nari wasn't looking at the stage. She was looking at the reflection in a dark window pane across the room. A red laser dot flickered for a millisecond on Kyo-moon's lapel. The red dot in the window reflection flickered and vanished, but Nari's heart had already stopped. She scanned the room, her instincts screaming louder than the polite murmur of the auction. The laser wasn't a shot. It was a signal. "Kyo-moon," she breathed, her fingers digging into his tuxedo jacket. He was looking up at the mezzanine, tracking a potential sniper. He didn't see the man in the white dinner jacket 5 feet away. The man moved against the flow of the crowd, his smile fixed, his right hand sliding into his cummerbund. It wasn't a gun. It was a glimmer of white ceramic, a blade that could bypass the metal detectors. He lunged. Kyo-moon was too slow. He was looking the wrong way. Nari didn't think, she didn't scream. She threw her entire body weight against Kyo Moon's chest, shoving him violently backward. Move! The assassin's strike, meant for Kyo Moon's carotid artery, hissed through the air. The ceramic blade caught the silk of Nari's gown at the shoulder, shredding the fabric and leaving a thin, stinging line of red across her skin. Kyo Moon stumbled back, catching his balance instantly. His eyes went from Nari's bleeding shoulder to the assassin's face, and the cold calculator vanished. The monster woke up. The assassin tried to reset for a second strike, but Kyo Moon was already there. He caught the man's wrist in a grip that sounded like cracking dry wood. The assassin gasped, the knife clattering to the parquet floor. Kyo Moon didn't stop. With a brutal, fluid motion, he drove his elbow into the man's throat, collapsing his windpipe, and swept his legs out from under him. It happened in 3 seconds. The champagne glass in the assassin's other hand didn't even shatter until he hit the floor, writhing in silent agony. The room erupted. Screams tore through the polite jazz. Security guards swarmed inward, guns drawn. Kyo Moon didn't look at the dying man. He grabbed Nari, pulling her behind the solid marble pillar of the archway. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. He ripped his handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it against the cut on her shoulder. "You're bleeding," he snarled, his eyes wild. "Why did you move? You should have dropped to the floor." "He was going to cut your throat," Nari yelled back, wincing as the white cloth turned red. "You were looking at the balcony." Kyo Moon stared at her. The chaos of the gala swirled around them, shouting, running footsteps, sirens in the distance. But for a moment, they were the only 2 people on Earth. He looked at the woman who had spent 3 days complaining about his pantry, now standing in a ruined dress, bleeding for him. "We're leaving," Kyo Moon said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. He holstered his gun and wrapped his arm around her waist, shielding her body with his own. "Hold on to me. If anyone else gets close, I will kill them." The armored door of the Maybach slammed shut, sealing out the sirens and the chaos of the underworld. Dae-sung didn't wait for a command. He floored the accelerator, tires screeching as the heavy vehicle tore onto the highway, weaving through traffic with terrified precision. Inside the cabin, the silence was deafening, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing. Kyo Moon hit the button to raise the partition, isolating them completely. He didn't sit back. He turned on the overhead reading light, casting a harsh, clinical glow over the back seat. His hands, usually steady enough to perform surgery or pull a trigger at 50 yards, were trembling slightly as he reached for the emergency medical kit stowed under the seat. "Let me see," he ordered, his voice rough. Nari hissed in pain as he peeled the blood-soaked handkerchief away from her shoulder. The adrenaline that had propelled her across the ballroom floor was crashing, replaced by a stinging, white-hot burn. "It's just a scratch," she stammered, wincing as he uncapped a bottle of antiseptic. "It's a 3-inch laceration from a ceramic blade," Kyo Moon corrected, his jaw tight. "If he had been an inch to the left, you would have bled out on the parquet floor before security even drew their weapons." He dabbed the wound with a tenderness that contradicted the fury in his eyes. Nari watched him. His hair was disheveled, his tuxedo jacket torn at the lapel, and the mask of the untouchable syndicate boss was gone. In its place was a man who looked distinctly human and terrified. "Why?" he asked, applying a sterile butterfly bandage to close the skin. He didn't look at the wound anymore. He looked directly into her eyes. The dark, bottomless annoyance she was used to seeing was gone. It had been replaced by something darker, heavier. "You're a hostage, Nari. You're supposed to hide. You're supposed to let me take the hit." I didn't think," Nari whispered. The proximity was overwhelming. The smell of copper blood, expensive leather, and his own musk filled the small space. "I just saw the knife. You threw yourself in front of a blade for a man who kidnapped you," Kyo-moon murmured. He finished taping the bandage, but didn't pull his hand away. His fingers lingered on her bare skin, just below the ruined strap of the midnight blue silk. The air in the car shifted. The fear of death had vanished, leaving behind a raw electric charge that made Nari's skin prickle. Kyo-moon wasn't looking at her like a liability anymore. He was looking at her mouth. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes, dark with a sudden, overwhelming hunger. "You are," he trailed off, shaking his head as if he couldn't find the word in any of the 5 languages he spoke. He leaned in. Nari stopped breathing. For a heartbeat, she thought he was going to kiss her. The space between them evaporated, the heat radiating from his chest, warming her cold skin. "Crazy," he finished, his voice a low growl. But his thumb brushed her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw with a reverence he had never shown the USB drive or the money. Absolutely crazy. He pulled back sharply, collapsing against his side of the seat and staring out the window at the blurring city lights. But his hand remained on the leather seat between them, inches from hers, trembling with the energy of a man who had just realized he might have found the one thing in the world he couldn't control. The silence of the penthouse felt different now. Before, it had felt like a fortress. Now, after the chaos of the gala, it felt like a cage that had barely held. Kyo-moon had disappeared into the master suite the moment the elevator doors opened, barking an order for Nari to go to her room and lock the door. But Nari couldn't. The adrenaline was still humming in her veins, making her hands shake and her mind race. She wandered down the hallway, the first aid kit still clutched in her hand, thinking he might need more antiseptic for the knuckles he'd split on the assassin's jaw. The door to his bedroom was ajar. Nari raised her hand to knock, then froze. Kyo-moon was standing in the center of the dimly lit room, facing away from her. He had stripped off his ruined tuxedo jacket and the white dress shirt, tossing them onto a chair. For the first time, Nari saw him without the armor of Italian wool and silk. She gasped softly. The sound was involuntary, but in the dead silence it was loud enough. Kyo-moon's back was a map of violence. It wasn't just smooth, sculpted muscle, it was a canvas of old pain. A jagged, raised welt ran diagonal from his left shoulder blade to his spine, a knife wound that hadn't healed right. Near his ribs, the puckered, starburst shape of a bullet entry wound shone pale against his skin. There were others, fainter silver lines crossing his lower back, marking the history of a man who had fought for every inch of the city he owned. He didn't turn around. He just stiffened slightly, sensing her eyes on him. "I told you to go to your room," he said, his voice weary. "I brought the iodine," Nari whispered, stepping into the room instead of retreating. "For your hand." She walked up to him, her eyes drawn to the terrible scar on his shoulder blade. It looked like it had burned. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers hovering inches from the skin. "Does it hurt?" Kyo-moon turned slowly. His chest was bare, revealing another scar across his collarbone. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face for fear or disgust. He found neither. The past always hurts, he replied quietly. That is why I built this place so high up, to get away from it. He took the bottle of iodine from her hand, setting it on the dresser without looking at it. You think I am a monster, he stated, stepping closer. And you are right. But every mark on my body is a mistake I survived. I don't have the luxury of being soft, Nari. Soft men in my world end up in the Han River. You're not a monster, Nari said, her voice steady. She looked at the bruises forming on his knuckles, bruises he got protecting her. You're just lonely. The word hung in the air between them, heavier than the scars. Kyo-moon looked at her stunned. He opened his mouth to deny it, to dismiss her with his usual cold arrogance. But the defenses didn't come. He just stood there, half naked and vulnerable, while the girl from the convenience store dismantled him with a single word. The intimacy of the moment in the bedroom was broken by the sharp, jarring buzz of Kyo-moon's secure phone on the dresser. He ignored it for a second, his eyes still locked on Nari's, before the mask of the cold warlord slammed back into place. He turned, grabbed a fresh black dress shirt from the closet, and buttoned it with stiff, mechanical movements. Come with me, he said, his voice stripped of the warmth that had been there moments ago. It's time to see what you risked your life for. He led her into the study, a room dominated by a wall of monitors that looked more like a NASA control center than a home office. He pulled the silver USB drive from his pocket, the object that had started this entire nightmare, and slotted it into the main terminal. A red dialog box appeared on the center screen. Enter decryption key. Kyo-moon stepped back, gesturing to the keyboard. You said you memorized it. Prove it. Nari sat in the heavy leather chair. Her hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She closed her eyes, visualizing the crumpled lottery ticket the customer had left on the counter. The numbers were burned into her memory. 08, 21, 44, 19, 05, 33. She typed them in. The silence in the room was absolute. Access granted. Files began to cascade down the screen, thousands of them. Spreadsheets, blueprints, shipping manifests. Kyo-moon leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the data with terrifying speed. His breath hitched. This isn't just leverage, he whispered, bracing his hands on the desk on either side of her. This is the kill shot. What is it? Nari asked, squinting at a map that had popped up. It showed a warehouse district in Incheon, marked with red thermal heat signatures. Director Suk doesn't keep his money in banks, Kyo-moon explained, his voice vibrating with a dark, predatory excitement. He keeps it in cryptocurrency. Everyone knew that. But no one knew where the physical cold storage servers were. If you destroy the servers, the keys are lost. The money vanishes. He pointed a long finger at the glowing red building on the map. This is it. This is his entire empire. Trillions of won, sitting in a basement in Incheon. He looked down at Nari. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't just a clerk. She was the only person in Seoul who had unknowingly carried the nuclear codes in her pocket for 3 days. You realize what this means, Kyo-moon said, his face grim. He won't just try to kill you to get this back. He will burn the entire city to the ground to find you. You are the most dangerous woman in Korea right now. Nari looked at the map, then up at him. Then we better burn him first. The smell of burnt gunpowder was sharper than the scent of expensive cologne Nari had grown used to. The basement of the penthouse wasn't a storage area. It was a state-of-the-art, soundproofed firing range, cold and clinical under the harsh halogen lights. "Your stance is weak," Kyo-moon said, his voice cutting through the ringing silence. "If you fire like that, the recoil will put you on your back." Nari grit her teeth, adjusting her grip on the matte black pistol. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked in movies, and her arms were already trembling from an hour of drills. She was dressed in a pair of borrowed gym shorts and a black t-shirt that was 3 sizes too big, tied at the waist to keep it from swallowing her. "I'm trying," she snapped, lifting the weapon again. "I usually scan barcodes, not aim at paper silhouettes." "The men coming for us won't be paper," Kyo-moon replied grimly. He moved behind her, his chest pressing lightly against her back. The sudden proximity made Nari's breath hitch. He reached around, his large hands engulfing hers on the grip of the gun, correcting the angle of her wrists. His touch was firm, professional, yet maddeningly intimate. "Lean into me," he murmured, his mouth close to her ear. "Absorb the shock with your core, not your shoulders. Lock your elbows. Now, breathe." Nari inhaled shakily, smelling the gun oil on his skin and the faint metallic scent of danger that always clung to him. She focused on the target 10 yards away, a faceless outline that could have been the assassin from the Gala. "Squeeze. Don't pull." She fired. The gun bucked in her hands, a violent jolt of energy. But Kyo-moon's body behind hers kept her steady. The bullet punched a hole through the target's shoulder. "Better," Kyo-moon said, stepping back. The loss of his warmth was instant and jarring. But a shoulder shot doesn't stop a man on adrenaline. You need to aim for the center of mass, or the head. He walked around to face her, taking the gun from her shaking hands and setting it on the table. "Now, hand to hand," he ordered. "Attack me." "What?" Nari blinked. "You're a foot taller than me and you kill people for a living." "Exactly. And if you get cornered, that is the disadvantage you will face. You cannot overpower them, Nari. You have to be faster. Dirtier." He lunged. Before Nari could react, he had her pinned against the padded wall, his forearm pressed against her collarbone. Not enough to hurt, but enough to immobilize her. "I have you," he whispered, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "What do you do?" Nari panicked for a split second, then remembered what he'd said about playing dirty. She slammed her heel down onto the arch of his foot and twisted her body, using her small size to slip under his guard. Kyo-moon grunted in surprise, stumbling back. Nari stood panting, her hair escaping her ponytail. Kyo-moon looked at her, rubbing his foot, a slow, dangerous smirk spreading across his face. "Good," he said, the air between them crackling with sudden, thick tension. "Do it again." The elevator chimed, a cheerful sound that shattered the quiet tension of the penthouse. Nari froze, her hand instinctively going to the waistband of her sweatpants, where Kyo-moon had told her to tuck a training knife. Kyo-moon didn't reach for a weapon. He glanced at the wall panel. "It's a legacy code," he muttered, his jaw tightening. "I thought I deleted it." The doors slid open. A woman stepped out. She was stunning in a way that made Nari's teeth ache. She wore a white power suit that looked like it had been tailored on her body, and her hair was a glossy waterfall of perfection. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like a queen returning to her castle. "Sohi," Kyo-moon said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. "You lost your key privileges 3 months ago." "And you lost your manners," the woman replied smoothly, walking into the room as if she still paid the mortgage. She carried a sleek leather briefcase. "I heard about the gala. I heard Director Suk is hunting you. I came to help." Her eyes swept the room and landed on Nari. She paused, her perfectly arched brow lifting a fraction of an inch. She took in Nari's oversized t-shirt, her messy ponytail, and the cheap gym shorts. "I didn't realize you were hiring new staff during a crisis," Sohi said, dismissing Nari with a bored glance before turning her dazzling smile back to Kyo-moon. "Though usually you prefer your housekeepers to be in uniform." Nari felt the insult like a slap. It wasn't the words, it was the casual, easy familiarity Sohi had with him. She walked up to Kyo-moon and placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of intimacy that implied years of history. "I'm not the housekeeper," Nari said, her voice sounding small and brittle in the vast room. Sohi didn't even look at her. She kept her eyes on Kyo-moon. "Kyo-moon, darling, we need to talk strategy. Alone. The board is nervous." Kyo-moon stepped back, dislodging Sohi's hand. He looked annoyed, but he didn't throw her out. He couldn't. She was evidently part of his world, the world of boards, strategies, and million-dollar suits. The world Nari didn't belong to. "Go to the guest room, Nari," Kyo-moon said without looking at her. He was focused on the briefcase Sohi was opening. Nari stood there for a second, a hot, ugly feeling bubbling up in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was a sharp, twisting knot of inadequacy. She looked at Sohi's perfect nails, then at her own hands, rough from stocking shelves and bruised from gun drills. "Fine," Nari snapped. "I'll go polish the silver." She turned on her heel and stormed down the hallway. She didn't see the way Kyo-moon's head snapped up at her tone, or the way his eyes followed her retreating figure with a look of concern that completely ignored the beautiful woman standing right in front of him. Nari waited until the rhythmic clicking of high heels faded into the elevator shaft before she ventured out of her room. The penthouse was silent, submerged in shadows. Sohi was gone, taking her perfect suit and her condescending smile with her. "Finally," Nari muttered, crossing the living room. "I hope the door hit her on the way out." She found Kyo-moon in the study. He wasn't sitting at his desk. He was slumped in the leather armchair, his head thrown back, his breathing ragged and shallow. The glow of the monitors cast a sickly blue light across his face, which was glistening with sweat. "Kyo-moon?" Nari asked, her lingering jealousy instantly replaced by a cold knot of fear. He didn't respond. Nari rushed to him, placing her hand on his forehead. He was burning up. His skin felt like a furnace. "Hey," she said, shaking his shoulder gently. "Wake up! You're boiling!" Kyo-moon's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused, swimming in a haze of fever. He looked at her without recognition for a terrifying second before his brow furrowed. "Nari, stay back." He tried to sit up, but a grimace of pain twisted his features, and he collapsed back with a groan, clutching his side. Nari looked down. His black dress shirt was stuck to his ribs, stiff with dried blood and wet with fresh seepage. "You're hurt," Nari gasped. She fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, her hands shaking. "Why didn't you say anything?" "It was just a scratch," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel. "From the Gala. Didn't have time." "You bandaged my shoulder while you were sitting there with an infected stab wound," Nari hissed, tearing the shirt open. The wound on his side was angry and red, radiating heat. "You absolute idiot!" She didn't ask for permission. She hooked her arm under his shoulder and hauled him up. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and exhaustion. But he leaned on her, trusting her blindly as she dragged him toward the bedroom. She got him onto the bed and ran for the first aid kit. For the next hour, the King of Seoul was at the mercy of a convenience store clerk. Nari cleaned the wound, wincing at the heat radiating from the infection, and forced antibiotics and water past his cracked lips. He thrashed in the grip of the fever, muttering disjointed commands and names of dead men. But every time Nari tried to pull away to wet a fresh towel, his hand would shoot out, gripping her wrist with bruising strength. "Don't go," he whispered, his eyes squeezing shut against the pain. "Don't run." Nari looked at the open bedroom door. The elevator code was on the desk. He was too weak to stop her. She could leave right now. She looked back at him, the scars, the sweat-dampened hair, the hand clinging to her like a lifeline. He wasn't the monster Sohi knew. He was just a man who had taken a knife for her. Nari sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed and threading her fingers through his. "I'm here," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm not going anywhere." The fever broke just before dawn, leaving the room steeped in a cool, grey silence. Nari had dozed off in the armchair pulled up to the bedside, her head resting uncomfortably on the mattress near Kyo-moon's hand. She woke to the sensation of fingers brushing through her hair. Nari stiffened, blinking sleep from her eyes. Kyo-moon was watching her. His skin was pale, clammy with the aftermath of the fever, but the glassy haze was gone from his eyes. They were dark, lucid, and focused entirely on her. "You're still here," he rasped, his voice rough with sleep. "I told you," Nari whispered, sitting up and rubbing the crick in her neck. "I'm not going anywhere. How do you feel?" "Like I was hit by a truck," he admitted, wincing as he shifted. "Or stabbed by a ceramic knife." He looked at the bandage on his side, then at the bowl of water and the array of medicines on the nightstand. He looked back at Nari, his expression unreadable. Sohi would have called a private doctor and left to make sure her stocks didn't dip. "Well, I don't have any stocks," Nari said, reaching for the water glass to help him drink. "And I don't trust doctors who work for mobsters." Kyo-moon took a sip, his gaze never leaving her face. He set the glass down but didn't let go of her hand. He tugged, gently but insistently. Nari, caught off guard, slid forward until she was leaning over him, her face inches from his. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. "Why did you stay, Nari?" he murmured. "You could have run. You could be halfway to Busan by now." Nari's breath hitched. She looked at his lips, cracked and dry, then up to his eyes, which were burning with a terrifying intensity. "You saved me at the Gala. I owed you." "Is that all?" Kyo-moon asked. He raised his hand, his thumb tracing the line of her lower lip. His touch was hot, sending a shiver straight through her. He shifted, groaning slightly from the pain but ignoring it to pull her closer. His forehead rested against hers. Nari could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the scent of soap and sickness and man. "I spent my whole life surrounded by queens and princesses," Kyo-moon whispered, his breath ghosting against her mouth. "Women like Sohi, cold, perfect, dangerous." He tilted his head, his nose brushing against hers. Nari's eyes fluttered shut, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I prefer the clerk," he breathed. "I prefer the girl who yells at me about salt." He closed the distance. His lips brushed the corner of her mouth, a feather-light touch that promised everything. Nari leaned in, surrendering, ready to bridge the final millimeter. But the kiss didn't come. Kyo-moon's hand slackened on her neck. His breathing deepened, slowing into the heavy rhythm of exhaustion. The adrenaline and the fever had finally claimed him, pulling him back into sleep, right on the precipice of the line they were about to cross. Nari pulled back, her lips tingling, her face burning. She stared at the sleeping warlord, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. "You idiot," she whispered into the silence, pulling the duvet up to his chin. "You absolutely terrified idiot." The morning sun that flooded the penthouse felt deceptive, promising warmth in a room that had suddenly turned freezing cold. Kyo-moon sat on the edge of the bed, buttoning a fresh shirt with stiff, pained movements. The fever had burned out, leaving him weak but lucid. "You should eat," Nari said, walking in from the kitchen with a tray of toast and tea. She looked exhausted, her hair messy, wearing the same oversized t-shirt she had lived in for 2 days. "I need to check the perimeter logs," Kyo-moon replied, trying to stand. He swayed slightly, and Nari was there instantly, her hand hovering near his elbow. "Sit down," she ordered softly. "Dae-sung is handling the perimeter. You pay him to worry so you don't have to." At the mention of his right-hand man, the elevator chimed. Kyo-moon straightened, masking his pain with practiced discipline. Speak of the devil. The doors slid open. Dae-sung stepped out. He looked impeccable in his black suit, his face impassive. But he didn't bow. He didn't walk toward the desk to deliver the morning briefing. He stopped in the center of the room, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "Report," Kyo-moon commanded, his voice raspy but authoritative. "Did we lose the tail from the museum?" "We did," Dae-sung said. His voice was flat. "But Director Suk is very persistent." Kyo-moon frowned. There was something wrong with the cadence of the sentence. "Dae-sung?" "He made an offer, sir," Dae-sung continued, his eyes shifting to Nari, then back to Kyo-moon. "He doesn't want a war. He just wants his daughter back. And the drive." "He doesn't have a daughter," Nari blurted out, stepping closer to Kyo-moon. "You know that. You drove the car." "I know," Dae-sung said. Slowly, he disowned her years ago. Deliberately, he reached into his jacket. Kyo-moon's instincts, honed by years of survival, screamed at him. He shoved Nari behind him, ignoring the tearing pain in his side, and reached for the gun he kept taped under the bedside table. He was too slow. Dae-sung raised his hand. He wasn't holding a datapad. He was holding a suppressed Glock, leveled directly at Kyo-moon's chest. "Don't," Dae-sung warned. "You're weak, boss. You'll never clear the holster before I put 2 in your heart." The silence that followed was heavier than the gunshot would have been. Kyo Moon stared at the man who had been his shadow for 10 years. The man who had driven him to the hospital, who had guarded his sleep, who knew every code and safe house. Dae-sung, Kyo Moon whispered, the betrayal hurting more than the infection in his side. Why? Suk offered me the Gangnam district, Dae-sung replied, his expression showing a flicker of regret, but no hesitation. You offered me a pension plan. It's just business, Kyo Moon. You taught me that. Dae-sung took a step back, keeping the gun trained on them, and reached for his earpiece. Package is secured, he said into the mic. The perimeter is down. Send the team up. He knows, Dae-sung said, his voice devoid of emotion. That was the first thing I gave him. The DNA test results from the hairbrush in the guest room. I ran the DNA the night we brought her in. I've known she was a fake for 3 days. I was just waiting for you to decrypt the drive before I handed her over. The words hit Kyo Moon harder than a bullet. He staggered slightly, his hand tightening on Nari's arm, not to shield her, but to steady himself. The entire house of cards, the gala, the fake video, the elaborate threats, had collapsed in a single data transfer. You told him she's a fake, Kyo Moon whispered, the realization turning his blood to ice. I told him she's a convenience store clerk named Nari, Dae-sung corrected. Which means she isn't leverage, Kyo Moon. She's just a liability. A civilian who has seen the inside of this operation and walked arm in arm with you in public. Nari stepped back, her back hitting the cold glass of the window. The terrifying safety of being a valuable hostage was gone. She wasn't a bargaining chip anymore. She was trash to be taken out. Suk doesn't want her back, Dae-sung continued, shifting his aim slightly to cover both of them as the elevator indicators began to count up again. Lobby, 10, 20. He wants her erased. And he wants the drive. The drive is encrypted, Nari said, her voice shaking. You can't open it without me. Dae-sung glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. Suk has technicians who can break a bank vault in 10 minutes. He thinks the code is on the drive. He doesn't know you memorized it. Kyo Moon's eyes snapped to Nari. It was a flicker of a warning. Don't tell him. If Dae-sung knew the code was in her head, they wouldn't just kill her. They would peel her apart to get it. The drive is in the study, Kyo Moon lied smoothly, stepping in front of Nari to break Dae-sung's line of sight. Take it and go. You don't have to do this. I do, Dae-sung replied, tightening his grip on the gun. Suk doesn't leave witnesses, and he definitely doesn't leave rivals alive. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open, revealing 4 men in tactical gear, faces covered by ballistic masks, assault rifles raised. The smell of ozone and aggression flooded the pristine penthouse. Secure the target, Dae-sung ordered, stepping back to let the wolves in. And burn the rest. Kyo Moon looked at the squad, then back at Nari. He was wounded, unarmed, and outgunned. But as the first soldier stepped onto the marble floor, Kyo Moon grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the side table and smashed it against the wall, creating a jagged glass shiv. Run to the bathroom, he roared, shoving Nari toward the hallway. Lock the door! The jagged crystal decanter didn't shatter against the lead mercenary's ballistic vest. Kyo Moon didn't aim for the chest. With the desperate speed of a dying animal, he drove the glass shard into the exposed gap between the soldier's helmet and collarbone. Blood sprayed across the pristine white marble. The soldier gurgled and dropped, his rifle clattering to the floor. "Fire!" Dae-sung ordered calmly, stepping behind the marble pillar. The room exploded in noise. Bullets chewed through the drywall and shattered the floor-to-ceiling windows, raining safety glass onto the expensive furniture. Kyo-moon dove behind the heavy leather sofa, his movements sluggish, the infection in his side screaming with every twist of his body. He grabbed the fallen mercenary's rifle, firing blindly over the couch to suppress the advance. "Nari, go!" he roared, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. Nari was in the hallway, her hand on the bathroom door handle. She looked back. She saw Kyo-moon take a round to his shoulder. The good one. The impact spun him around, slamming him against the wall. He slid down, leaving a smear of bright crimson on the wallpaper. He wasn't going to make it. If she ran into the bathroom and locked the door, he would die in the hallway. "No," Nari gritted out. She didn't run away. She ran back. Staying low, she scrambled across the floor as bullets whizzed inches above her head. She grabbed the collar of Kyo-moon's shirt just as a mercenary vaulted over the kitchen island. "Get up!" she screamed, hauling him with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Move!" Kyo-moon groaned, his eyes unfocused. But the sound of her voice triggered some deep lizard brain instinct. He pushed himself up, firing 3 controlled bursts that forced the mercenaries to duck. Together they stumbled backward into the master bathroom. Nari slammed the heavy oak door shut and threw the deadbolt just as a body slammed against the other side. "Open it!" a voice shouted, followed by the deafening crack of a rifle butt hitting the wood. Kyo-moon slid down the door, leaving a trail of blood. He dropped the rifle, his hands too weak to hold it. The penthouse was a kill box. They were trapped in a room with no exit, with 4 armed men on the other side and a traitor who knew every weakness of the building. "The mirror," Kyo-moon gasped, coughing blood onto his chin. He pointed a trembling finger at the massive vanity mirror above the sinks. "Break the mirror." Nari looked at him, then at the mirror. She grabbed a heavy marble soap dispenser. "Why?" she cried, panic rising as the door hinges began to buckle under the assault. "Maintenance. Shoot," Kyo-moon wheezed, his head lolling back. "Behind it." The mirror shattered with a deafening crash, raining silver shards into the porcelain sinks. Nari frantically cleared the jagged edges with her sleeve, revealing a dark, square cavity in the concrete wall. A narrow maintenance chase filled with pipes and cables. "Go," Kyo-moon rasped, his hand gripping her ankle weakly. "Slide down. Cables. 2nd floor garage." "Not without you!" Nari sobbed, grabbing his good arm. She pulled, her shoes slipping on the blood-slicked tile. "Get up! Please, Kyo-moon, get up!" He tried. He grit his teeth and forced his body to obey, but his legs were unresponsive. The infection and the blood loss had sapped the strength from his limbs. He collapsed back against the vanity, the rifle sliding from his grip. "I can't," he whispered, looking up at her with eyes that were dimming. "Nari, run." Before she could argue, the bathroom door exploded inward. Wood splinters flew like shrapnel. A heavy boot kicked the remaining wreckage aside, and 3 mercenaries poured into the small space, the laser sights of their rifles cutting through the dust. Nari didn't scream. She grabbed a shard of mirror glass from the sink, brandishing it like a dagger, standing between the men and Kyo-moon. "Back off!" she yelled, her voice cracking. Dae-sung stepped through the ruined doorway, stepping over the debris with calm precision. He looked at Nari, then at the dying man on the floor. He didn't even raise his weapon. "Cute," Dae-sung said dryly. He nodded to the man on his left. The mercenary moved with a blur of speed. He swatted Nari's hand aside, sending the glass shard skittering across the floor, and slammed her against the tiled wall. "No!" Kyo-moon roared, a surge of adrenaline forcing him to lift the rifle. Dae-sung kicked the weapon out of his hand before he could find the trigger, then stomped hard on Kyo-moon's wounded shoulder. Kyo-moon shouted in agony, his vision whitening out. "Leave him," Dae-sung ordered, as the mercenaries zip-tied Nari's wrists behind her back. "He's dead anyway. We have the girl. She's the one Suk wants to bleed." "Let me go!" Nari screamed, kicking and thrashing as two men hauled her off her feet. She locked eyes with Kyo-moon as they dragged her toward the door. "Kyo-moon! Get up! You have to get up!" Kyo-moon reached out, his fingers scrabbling uselessly against the cold tiles. He watched as she was dragged into the hallway, her sneakers squeaking on the marble, her screams echoing until the elevator doors dinged shut. Then there was silence. Kyo-moon lay alone in the ruins of his empire. The only sound was the drip of water from a broken pipe and the shallow, ragged intake of his own breath. He stared at the empty doorway, the darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision. Nari. He closed his eyes, and the darkness took him. The bucket of ice water hit Nari like a physical blow, shocking a gasp out of her freezing lungs. She sputtered, shaking her head, water dripping from her nose and chin onto the concrete floor. She was zip-tied to a heavy steel chair in the center of a cavernous, empty warehouse. The only light came from a single blinding halogen bulb hanging directly above her head. The air smelled of rust, damp rot, and old blood. "Wake up, Ms. Nari," a soft grandfatherly voice said. "We have a lot of work to do." Nari blinked against the glare. A man stepped into the circle of light. Director Suk didn't look like a monster. He looked like a university professor. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a beige cardigan over his dress shirt. He leaned heavily on a cane with a polished ivory handle. "You have something of mine," Suk said, his voice gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying than Kyo-moon's shouting. "Dae-sung tells me you have a remarkable memory. He says you memorized the encryption key from a lottery ticket." Nari shivered, her teeth chattering. Dae-sung stood in the shadows behind the director, his face impassive, arms crossed. The sight of him made bile rise in her throat. "I don't know what you're talking about," Nari rasped. "I'm just a clerk." Suk sighed, looking disappointed. He tapped his cane on the concrete. "Please, let us not insult each other's intelligence. Kyo-moon is dead. He bled out on his bathroom floor 20 minutes ago. There is no white knight coming to save you." The words tore through Nari's chest, sharper than any knife. Dead. The man who had shielded her, who had stitched her wounds, who had almost kissed her. Gone. "If he's dead," Nari whispered, lifting her chin, "then you'll never get that money. Because I'm the only one who knows the numbers." Suk smiled. It was a cold, reptilian expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Precisely. Which is why you are still breathing. But pain is a very effective key, my dear." He nodded to Dae-sung. The traitor stepped forward. He didn't look happy about it, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed Nari's hair, yanking her head back, forcing her to look up at the blinding light. "Just give him the numbers, Nari," Dae-sung said, his voice low. "Don't make this ugly." 08. Nari spat the first number out, glaring at Dae-sung upside down. Suk leaned in, eager. "Yes?" 21, she continued. "Go to hell." Suk's face hardened. He straightened up and adjusted his glasses. "Break her fingers," he ordered calmly, turning to walk away. "Start with the left hand. We need the right one to type the code eventually." As Dae-sung reached for her hand, Nari screamed, her cry echoing uselessly against the corrugated metal roof. The silence in the penthouse bathroom was broken by a gasp that sounded like a drowning man breaking the surface. Kyo-moon didn't die. He refused to. He dragged his broken body to the shattered vanity. Nari had cleared the glass to find an escape route, but she hadn't looked deep enough. Kyo-moon reached into the dark cavity, his bloody fingers fumbling until they closed around a cold, hard case. He cracked it open. A single syringe of military-grade epinephrine and a coagulant auto-injector. The dead man's switch he had prepared for a day exactly like this. He didn't hesitate. He jammed the needle into his thigh. The roar that tore from his throat wasn't human. It was the sound of a predator forcing its heart to beat again. The world sharpened into high-contrast focus. The pain didn't vanish, but it was pushed behind a wall of white-hot chemical rage. He grabbed the dead mercenary's rifle from the floor. He checked the magazine. Full. In the warehouse, Dae-sung paused. He held Nari's trembling hand, his thumb pressing down on her knuckle, ready to dislocate it. "Did you hear that?" Dae-sung asked, looking toward the heavy loading dock doors. "Hear what?" Suk asked, annoyed, tapping his cane. "Focus, Dae-sung. Break the finger." It was a heavy, wet sound against the metal door, like a body being thrown. Another one. Then, silence. Nari lifted her head, tears streaming down her face. She knew that silence. It was the breath before the strike. The lock on the steel door didn't click open. It disintegrated. A deafening boom shook the warehouse, sending dust raining down from the rafters. The heavy doors shrieked as they were kicked open, revealing the smoke-filled night air and a figure silhouetted against the headlights of a burning SUV. Kyo-moon stepped into the light. He looked like a demon dredged up from the deepest circle of hell. His black shirt was shredded, soaked in so much blood it was impossible to tell where the fabric ended and the wounds began. He walked with a limp, dragging his left leg, but his movement was unstoppable. He held an assault rifle taken from Suk's outside guard detail. Suk dropped his cane, his face draining of color. Impossible. Kyo-moon didn't speak. He didn't bargain. He raised his rifle. "Get down!" Dae-sung roared, diving for cover behind a crate. Kyo-moon unleashed a storm of lead. He didn't aim for cover. He chewed through it. He walked forward into the hail of return fire from Suk's remaining men, ignoring the bullets that sparked off the concrete around him. He wasn't fighting for territory or money anymore. He was a dead man walking, and he was going to take every single one of them with him. "Nari!" he roared, his voice a blood-curdling thunderclap over the gunfire. "Close your eyes!" The rifles clicked dry. The sound echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the warehouse like a judge's gavel. Bodies littered the concrete floor. Suk's hired guns neutralized in a blur of violent efficiency. But the two men who mattered were still standing. Dae-sung emerged from behind a stack of crates, dragging Nari with him. His arm was locked around her throat, the barrel of his Glock pressed so hard against her temple it indented the skin. "That's enough," Dae-sung barked, his voice tight. "Drop them, Kyo-moon, or she dies before you hit the floor." Kyo-moon stood swaying in the center of the carnage. The epinephrine was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of blood loss. He looked at Nari, her face wet with tears, her eyes wide with terror, and his hands slowly opened. The assault rifles clattered to the ground. "Let her go," Kyo-moon rasped, blood dripping from his chin. "This is between us, Dae-sung. Brother to brother." "We aren't brothers," Dae-sung spat, tightening his grip on Nari until she gasped for air. "You made me a servant. Suk made me a partner." Director Suk stepped out from the shadows, dusting off his cardigan, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Kill him, Dae-sung. We can extract the code from the girl later." "No!" Kyo-moon shouted, his voice cracking. He took a staggering step forward. "She doesn't have the code anymore. She told me. In the car." Nari froze. It was a lie. A desperate, blatant lie. "She gave me the sequence," Kyo-moon lied, locking eyes with Dae-sung. "She's useless to you. I'm the one with the billions in my head. You want the money. You let her walk out those doors. You kill her. I take the numbers to hell." Dae-sung hesitated. He looked at Nari, then at the dying warlord. The greed in his eyes warred with his training. "Prove it," Dae-sung challenged. 08. 21? Kyo-moon recited the first two numbers Nari had screamed during the torture. He paused, smirking through the blood. "You want the rest? Release the girl." Suk stepped forward, his cane tapping impatiently. "Do it," Dae-sung. "The girl is a liability. Secure the money." Dae-sung shoved Nari forward violently. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the dirty concrete. "Run," Kyo-moon whispered, sinking to his own knees as his legs finally gave out. He was 5 feet away from her, eye level now. "Get out of here, Nari." "I'm not leaving you," Nari sobbed, reaching for him. "Go!" Kyo-moon roared, gathering the last ounce of his strength to glare at her. "Don't let me die for nothing!" Dae-sung racked the slide of his pistol, aiming it at Kyo-moon's forehead. "The exchange is made. Give me the numbers, boss." Nari stopped. The darkness of the open warehouse door promised freedom, survival, and a life where she would never have to see a gun again. But the sound of Kyo-moon's ragged breathing anchored her feet to the concrete. She turned around. Kyo-moon was on his knees, a broken king awaiting execution. He was staring at her with desperate, pleading eyes, silently begging her to save herself. "He's lying," Nari said. Her voice was quiet, trembling, but in the echoing warehouse, it cut through the tension like a blade. Dae-sung froze. His finger hovered over the trigger. He didn't look away from Kyo-moon, but his head tilted slightly. "What did you say?" "He doesn't know the code," Nari said, stepping back into the harsh circle of light. She walked past the stunned Director Suk, moving until she stood directly between the gun and Kyo-moon. "He never saw the lottery ticket. He's bluffing to get you to release me." "Nari, stop!" Kyo-moon snarled, trying to lunge for her, but his body failed him. He collapsed forward onto his hands, coughing blood. "Get out of here!" Nari ignored him. She looked straight into Dae-sung's eyes. I am the only person on earth who knows the sequence. If you kill him, you get nothing. If you kill me, you get nothing. Suk hurried forward, waving his hands frantically. Don't shoot her! Dae-sung, lower the weapon. The money is in her head. Dae-sung hesitated. The certainty of the kill was gone, replaced by the confusion of the gamble. Slowly, he swung the barrel of the Glock away from Kyo-moon's head and leveled it at Nari's chest. Prove it, Dae-sung hissed. Give me the rest. Nari took a deep breath. She could feel Kyo-moon's hand gripping the hem of her jeans, a weak, frantic attempt to pull her away from the bullet. 44, Nari recited, her voice gaining strength. 19. Dae-sung's eyes widened slightly. He recognized the cadence of the truth. For a split second, his focus shifted. He wasn't looking at the dying threat on the floor anymore. He was looking at the walking bank vault. That was the mistake. Kyo-moon didn't need strength. He needed distraction. As Dae-sung's eyes locked onto Nari, Kyo-moon moved. It wasn't the graceful strike of a martial artist. It was the savage, desperate lunge of a wounded animal. He drove his shoulder into Dae-sung's knees. The impact buckled the traitor's legs. The gun discharged, the bullet tearing harmlessly into the ceiling as Dae-sung fell backward. Run! Kyo-moon roared, scrambling on top of Dae-sung, his hands going for the traitor's throat. But Dae-sung was fresh, and Kyo-moon was running on fumes. Dae-sung slammed the butt of the pistol into Kyo-moon's temple, knocking him sideways. He raised the gun to finish it. Nari didn't run. She saw the loose ceramic tile on the floor, debris from the explosion. She grabbed it with both hands and brought it down on Dae-sung's wrist with a sickening crunch. Dae-sung screamed, dropping the gun. It skittered across the concrete, spinning away into the shadows. Dae-sung roared in pain, rolling away from Kyo-moon to clutch his shattered wrist. The distraction bought them a second, but only a second. With his good hand, Dae-sung lashed out, his heavy boot connecting solidly with Kyo-moon's already broken ribs. Kyo-moon crumpled, the air leaving his lungs in a wheezing gasp. He didn't get up. He curled inward, protecting his vital organs, his body finally reaching its absolute limit. I'm going to kill you, Dae-sung spat, staggering to his feet. He ignored the gun lost in the shadows. He reached into his boot and pulled a jagged tactical knife. And then I'm going to peel the numbers out of the girl. No! Nari scrambled on her hands and knees toward the darkness, where the Glock had skittered. She heard the whoosh of air before she felt the pain. Director Suk brought his ivory-handled cane down hard across her back. Nari cried out, collapsing onto the concrete, her fingers inches from the weapon. Stay down, you foolish girl, Suk shouted, raising the cane for another strike. You are property. You do not fight back. Nari looked up. Across the warehouse, Dae-sung was straddling Kyo-moon, raising the knife for a killing stroke. Kyo-moon's eyes were open, but they were dim, accepting the end. He looked at her one last time, his lips moving silently to form a single word. Live. Something snapped inside Nari. The terror that had defined her for 3 days, the fear of the customers, the fear of the boss, the fear of death, evaporated. She ignored Suk. She rolled forward, ignoring the cane striking her shoulder, and grabbed the cold, heavy polymer of the Glock. She spun onto her back. She didn't think about aim or stance or breathing. She just pointed the barrel at the man trying to kill the only person who had ever looked at her and seen someone worth saving. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The recoil jarred her arm to the bone. Dae-sung froze. The knife slipped from his fingers. He looked down at his chest, where a dark flower was blooming rapidly against his white shirt. He looked at Nari with an expression of pure, baffled shock. The clerk? The girl who organized spices? He swayed, then collapsed sideways off of Kyo-moon, hitting the concrete with a heavy, final thud. Silence rushed back into the room, ringing in Nari's ears. Director Suk dropped his cane. He backed away, his hands trembling in the air. Now, Miss Nari, let's be reasonable. Nari scrambled to her feet. She didn't lower the gun. She walked over to Kyo-moon, standing over his broken body like a guardian angel forged in hellfire. She leveled the weapon at Suk's head. Get on your knees, she commanded, her voice steady and cold as ice. Or I swear to God, I will empty the magazine. Director Suk fell to his knees, his expensive trousers soaking up the grime of the warehouse floor. Please, he stammered, hands trembling in the air. I can pay you. Whatever he promised you, I will double it, triple it. Just put the gun down. Nari didn't blink. The girl who used to apologize when customers bumped into her was gone. She walked forward, keeping the sight trained on the bridge of his nose. She kicked Dae-sung's body, dislodging a bundle of thick plastic zip ties from his belt, the same ones meant for her fingers. She tossed them at Suk. Put them on, she ordered, her voice flat. Wrists behind your back. Pull them tight. If you hesitate, I shoot your kneecap. Suk fumbled, sobbing quietly as he obeyed. The power dynamic had shifted so violently, he couldn't process it. He was a man who moved billions with a phone call, now being disarmed by a minimum wage worker. Nari circled behind him, checking the plastic. She yanked it tighter until he yelped, then shoved him face down onto the concrete next to his dead enforcer. If you move, she whispered, leaning down, you die. She turned and ran to Kyo-moon. He was barely conscious. His skin was grey, his breath coming in shallow, rattling gasps. The adrenaline had burned out, leaving nothing but broken bones and failing organs. Kyo-moon? She touched his face. It was terrifyingly cold. Hey, we have to go. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dim. Nari. The name was a ghost of a whisper. Leave me. Shut up, she sobbed, hooking her arms under his shoulders. I am not leaving you here with him. Push! She pulled. It was like trying to lift a marble statue. He groaned, a sound of pure agony that tore at her heart. But he tried. He dug his heels into the bloody concrete, his survival instinct flickering one last time for her sake. They stumbled toward the open bay doors. Every step was a battle. Nari's muscles screamed, her knees buckled under their combined weight, but she refused to let him fall. She dragged the most feared man in Seoul to Director Suk's armored SUV parked outside. She shoved him into the passenger seat, buckling him in as his head lolled against the window. He was fading fast. Nari climbed into the driver's seat. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the wheel. She looked at the dashboard. It was like a spaceship compared to the delivery scooters she was used to. She found the start button and slammed her foot on the gas. The SUV roared to life, tires screeching as she peeled out of the lot, leaving the warehouse and the bodies behind in the dust. She merged onto the highway, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. She glanced at the passenger seat. Kyo-moon was silent, his chest barely rising. "Don't you dare die," Nari whispered fiercely, tears finally spilling over. "You owe me a salary." Chapter 30. The rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the neon lights of Seoul into frantic streaks of colour. Nari gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, weaving the heavy armoured SUV through traffic with a recklessness that would have terrified her old self. "Kyo-moon!" she shouted over the roar of the engine. "Stay with me! Talk to me!" Beside her, the King of Seoul slumped against the door, his breathing sounding like wet gravel rattling in a tin can. His skin was the colour of ash. He cracked one eye open, the pupil blown wide with shock. "Not hospital," he wheezed, clutching his side. "Police. Sook's payroll." "Then where?" Nari screamed, swerving to miss a taxi. "I can't stitch a bullet wound with a sewing kit, Kyo-moon. You need a surgeon." Kyo-moon's hand fumbled blindly until it found her arm. His grip was weak, trembling. "Itaewon. Back alley. Behind the Blue Jazz Club. Ask for the butcher." "The butcher? That sounds sanitary." But Nari didn't argue. She spun the wheel, tires screeching as she exited the highway, plunging into the labyrinthine streets of the district. 10 minutes later, she skidded to a halt in a garbage-strewn alleyway that smelled of stale beer and rain. A rusted metal door with no handle stood under a flickering yellow light. Nari scrambled out, running around to the passenger side. She hauled Kyo-moon out. He was dead weight now, his legs dragging through the puddles. She pounded on the metal door with the butt of the Glock she had tucked into her waistband. "Open up!" she screamed, the rain plastering her hair to her face. "Open the damn door!" A slot slid open. A pair of suspicious eyes peered out. "We're closed." "I have Kyo-moon," Nari yelled, breathless, holding up the unconscious boss like a shield. "He's dying. If he dies on your doorstep, his entire organization will burn this building down with you inside." The eyes widened. Locks tumbled, 3 of them. The door swung open. A short, balding man in a stained apron stared at the bloody tableau. He didn't ask questions. He grabbed Kyo-moon's other arm. "Table," the man grunted, dragging them toward a metal slab in the center of a room that looked half veterinary clinic, half torture chamber. They hoisted him onto the cold steel. Kyo-moon let out a low moan, his head lolling back. The butcher ripped open Kyo-moon's shirt, revealing the ruin of his chest. He cursed softly. "Get out," the man barked at Nari, reaching for a scalpel and a bottle of vodka. "No," Nari said, stepping closer and grabbing Kyo-moon's cold hand. She wiped the rain and blood from his forehead. "I'm staying." Kyo-moon's eyes fluttered. He found her face in the harsh light. A faint, bloody smile touched his lips. "Stubborn," he whispered, before his eyes rolled back and the darkness finally took him.